So just for sake of everyone, when we think of Banaras in public consciousness, Banaras holds a deep religious significance. It is a city of temples. It is a city of the holy Ganga. It's a city of pilgrims. And it's a city that is considered to be a place of deep peace and calm. But today I want to introduce you to a different face of Banaras. This is Manikarnika Ghat, also known as Mahashamsan Ghat. And if you look closely, you can see that there are men milling about. In the river, there are buffaloes, there are firewood in the boats. If you look at the lower left corner of the image, there are corpses lying at the riverfront. And they are covered by something called a shroud. In Hindi, it's called kafan. And the shroud is this fabric that is draped on the corpses. And they come in different colors of orange, yellow, golden, silver, red. And Manikarnika Ghat is important in Hindu society because it is believed that if a person is cremated at Manikarnika Ghat or Harishchandra Ghat, which is also another cremation ground, then they will receive moksha. And moksha can only be received if they are cremated by something called the sacred fire, which is in the ownership of the Dome community, a community of corpse burners. I'm going to request all of you to take a moment and really take in this image. This is a corpse burner. He is running between two pyres. He has no protective paraphernalia. He's not wearing a mask. He has no gloves. All he has to protect himself is this orange-red gamcha. And you can't see, but there's immense smoke over there. And this smoke is so thick from the pyres that it goes and settles deep within your lungs. And the ground below radiates immense heat. And this image was taken during peak summers. So the corpse burners who work here 24/7, they get really dehydrated. In the foreground, there is the shrouds, the discarded shrouds, which I'll tell you the significance of later in the presentation. This is also used by the Dome community. And in the background, there are these discarded bamboo biers on which the corpses arrive at Manikarnika Ghat. It's not moving. Okay. Just to give you an idea of how thick the smoke is, this is one gully that leads to Manikarnika Ghat. Now, in this image, in the background, you can see the Manikarnika Ghat, and in the foreground, there's a boatsman. And I took this image to show that, at Manikarnika Ghat, the locals say that Shivji whispers the Tarak mantra, or the ferry boat mantra, into the ears of the deceased, which enables the soul to travel with Shiva from the riverbank of the Ganges towards heaven. In this image, you can see that there are a lot of firewood. And at Manikarnika Ghat, one striking element is, you'll see columns and columns of firewood stacked one on top of the other. And even in the boats, you can see there's like many wood, like logs of wood there. And it just goes to show the quantity of cremation, the corpses that are cremated at the cremation ground. So this is this work is very, they work in a very hostile environment. It's very unrewarding for the corpse burners. And because of the trying circumstances, they start drinking at a very early age. They start consuming drugs. And it's a very tough work environment for them. So I spoke to a couple of corpse burners, and they told me that they had seen and cremated all sorts of bodies, corpses with smashed skulls, severed limbs, gunshot wounds, and knife-torn torsos. And Akash Chaudhary, who is one of the corpse burners who I interviewed, he said, "We have to see and smell such terrible things that we feel sick to our stomachs. Alcohol makes things bearable. At least our breath smells of liquor and not of a decaying corpse. So, what is it like for the children over there in the Dome community? This is an image I took at Harish Chandra Ghat, where the children are playing, and you can see that there is no supervision. They are left to their own devices. This is their playground. And at a very young age, the boys from this community, around 5 to 6 years old, they start going to Manikarnika Ghat to work over there to pick up the same shrouds that I was talking about. They pick these shrouds up and they scavenge them and they sell it to shopkeepers at Manikarnika Ghat and Harish Chandra Ghat. And the shopkeepers in turn wash these shrouds and they repackage it and sell it to the mourning customers. This is Kavi Chaudhary. He was 13 years old when I took this image of his. He's working at Manikarnika Ghat at 10 o'clock. Instead of sitting in the comfort of his home, instead of being tucked in, he is trying to make a livelihood at Manikarnika Ghat late into the night. Bhola Chaudhary is one of the former shroud pickers, and he told me, and I quote him here, "We have burned our legs, almost stripped into the fire, or returned home with nails buried deep into the soles of our feet. We don't go to the doctors because medicines are expensive. To heal the wound, our mothers dip a cloth of hot kerosene oil and massage it over our feet. But there were times when we couldn't run home for help, so we picked up the mud that was available at Manikarnika Ghat and rubbed that on our wounds to stop the bleeding." The women in the community, let's segue to that. There are young girls from the community who are pulled out of schools at a very young age, and they get married early as well. And this is an image of one of the married women. When they get married, they have the crescent moon and the sun symbols tattooed on their forearms. And there is also the name of their husband that is tattooed on their forearm, which I've hidden here to protect the identity of the husband. But when the men get married, none of this, they don't get tattooed anywhere on their bodies. When the women step out of their homes, they take the sari's pallu and they put it over their faces as a veil. But when they step out of the neighborhood, they're supposed to wrap themselves in something called the chadar, which is this net-like fabric. And here you can see the woman's entire identity. Her face has been obscured, and by extension, her entire identity has been obscured. So here, there are two Dome women who are outside in the public. And I asked one of them, what it is like to wear the chadar. And one of them told me, "We don't like it. We go out, we put on so much makeup, and all of that is hidden under the ugly chadar." I'll end this presentation here. Since we are all lovers of literature and books, I thought this image, which is of a bookstore in Banaras, would be appropriate. And now Manjula and I will go into a deeper conversation about the book. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I found this book particularly interesting and insightful because, as a Hindu, somewhere in the background, I just assumed, since I live in the north, that I would end up at Manikarnika Ghat, okay? But now that I've read the book, I'm not so sure because, as somebody with a social conscience, it's difficult to overlook things. And what also struck me when I was reading this book is that I myself never thought of the corpse burners, And in your book, what it's done is that it stops, it puts a spotlight on the domes, and it makes any thinking person who's reading it look at themselves and their assumptions and also recognize the contribution of this community. So that's a big thing, and thank you for that. It's actually in the realm of proper social service, to be writing a book like this. And so, but also what struck me when I read the book was that there was so much of your involvement. A lot of journalists kind of parachute into places, they do their stories and they get out. There's not, their subject is, I mean, it's something that they profit from in a certain sense, and the gorier the story is, the more profitable it is for them. But in this case, it's not like that, and you've maintained like long relationships with these people. You know them, you became a part of their lives, and as somebody who is not, as a privileged person, class, caste, background-wise, you've managed to overcome the invisible barrier that we all have. I mean, let's face it, people from a certain strata in Indian society, we're cocooned from the most horrible things that happen. So begin with your involvement with it and how you started work on this book. Let's start with that. Let me go with you.
Yeah. So I was pursuing my master's in journalism at Columbia University, and at that time we were looking for a subject to work on our thesis. And I had, researched, and I found a couple of subjects that I wanted to work on. But then I came across an article about the Dome community, and I was, immediately curious to learn more about the community. And so I went and I tried to do research, and everything that I found was, the academic literature was not sufficient. It had a very unidimensional representation about the community, which was limited to their presence at the cremation ground. And I wanted to understand other facets about their life. What about the Dome men? How does it feel for them to be working at the cremation ground every day of their lives? How does that impact them psychologically? To be seeing so many corpses every day, and for a pitiable income. What about the children? How, are they getting good quality education? How is the internet impacting them or influencing them? Are they being, is the education making them capable adults? And what about the women? Why are they unseen from public spaces? Are they able to step out of their homes and earn a living? So these were the questions that were lingering in my mind, and that's how I decided to work on this subject.
So talk about your relationships with these people. Since you've built them over years, you return, and they're a part of your life as well. You've had, they're your friends now. So, and while you were there, at least Bhola, one of the young people there, managed to escape and to get out and get an education for himself, which historically domes haven't been doing. They've not put their children in schools because they're so poor on the one hand, and on the other hand, they can make money, right? I mean, from the youngest age, stealing shrouds, and that's a sort of apprenticeship. Even they probably consider it as that. So talk about the changes that are happening, which you show in your book. Within the Dome community now.
But changes in terms of like how Bhola has been able to get out of the community?
Yes, and inspiring others to follow his example as well, right?
Sure. So Bhola is this, let me just introduce Bhola as an individual. He's one of the members of the Dome community, and Bhola is this young man in his 20s when we meet him. And he is this highly ambitious, very intelligent man. And he is the only one who's been able to get out of the Dome Basti and pursue higher education. And unfortunately, he's in another city when he's pursuing his higher education, which is in Ludhiana. But he hides his caste from his classmates. He doesn't let anyone know who he is, that he's the son of a corpse burner. And it really, and he does that not because he is ashamed of who he is. He does it because in his own experience, what he has undergone all his childhood years is that anyone who learns his truth, anyone who learns that he belongs to a community of cremators, they start distancing themselves from him, or they start, or they try to humiliate him or ostracize him. So, therefore, Bhola protects himself and protects his identity. He doesn't let anyone know that. And in college also, when he's studying, he'll try to do everything to fit into that middle class universe. So he'll make sure his hair is combed a certain way. He'll dress sharply. His shoes will always be polished. And he learns English, he polishes it to the best of his abilities. So when sometimes he mispronounces words in college and his classmates make fun of him, but he doesn't let that deter him in any way. He'll tell them, okay, tell me how to pronounce it correctly. And they then tell him, and then he keeps pronouncing it over and over and over again until he masters it. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that Bhola is the kind of person who doesn't let anything come in his way. So even when he is growing up in Chand Ghat, he tells his neighbors that he will leave Chand Ghat one day. And he's like 5 or 6 years old at that time. And his neighbors would just laugh at him and say, you are the son of a corpse burner. And a son of a corpse burner can grow up to be nothing more but a cremator. But that's, that Bhola takes that as an impetus to really push himself forward to succeed. And he sort of tells them that, I'm going to change this narrative. And he manages to do that. So,
Okay, and another thing that struck me while I was reading a book is that because the domes think of themselves as chosen in a certain way and exceptional because they are the keepers of the holy fire, that's sort of and because they're so necessary to anybody gaining moksha, So in a sense, because of that status, though they're very poor and though they are untouchable, they don't think of themselves as part of the greater Dalit narrative in a sense, because would that be true?
No, what you're saying is that the domes, basically, they are very important to the last rites ceremony because they are the ones who provide moksha. So from that viewpoint, because they are the owners of this sacred fire, which has been supposedly been burning for centuries, from that viewpoint, the sacred fire carries deep religious significance, and by extension, so do the domes. But this importance is only limited to their work at the cremation ground. By a majority of dominant caste Hindus, they are still considered to be untouchables, even to this day. So that dichotomy exists, for sure.
Yeah, so that probably complicates their lives even further, right? Because as one of the domes mentioned, we are not sweepers, So, let's talk about maybe, because it's within your head. I mean, even the caste system is, within our collective consciousness, right? I mean, it's within. We think of it within. So, doesn't it complicate sort of being part of a narrative where you can push yourself forward and improve in inverted commas your caste status? Is that a thing?
Unfortunately, that's now how it works. Of course, the domes do believe that they are the sole owners of the sacred fire. So they feel that they are the chosen ones by Shiva, because Shivji is the one who is, in Hindu mythology, it's believed that Shivji is the one who's gifted them this boon of having the sacred fire. And so all the domes are very proud of the fact that they are the only ones who can give moksha. So, if I give you an example, one of the domes who I spoke to, he's a corpse burner. No, he works at the he works at the
Electric crematorium.
crematorium, and he told me, चाहे राजा हो या फकीर, अंत में चौधरी जी के पैर पकड़ने ही पकड़ने हैं. Which is whether you're a prince or a pauper, at the end of the day, you have to fall at Chaudhry's feet. And Chaudhrys in this context are, of course, the domes. And so there is immense pride attached to the fact that they can give moksha. But at the same time, I feel, they do that because they're trying to justify their place in society. In a society that otherwise humiliates them, ridicules them, treats them as untouchables. So they're trying to find some significance, some validation. But at the same time, I feel that they unwittingly are, perpetuating this narrative of oppression. Because at the end of the day, no privileged caste person would want to cremate the dead, right? So it's
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, there was a particular thing that Bhola, the man that you spoke about earlier, said that, there is no, what he wants for his community is that, there should be fixed working hours and there should be, protection and it should be a more congenial environment. So basically what he's asking for is labor rights, right? Which not surprisingly, because they're still in that old system, they don't have those rights. Like, talk about what happened during COVID when they were just pulled out and they were burning bodies constantly, right? And no one in a society that respects workers would compel them to do that. So
yeah. So during COVID, as we all know, there was like this wave of panic, right? All of us were very worried. We had no idea what was going on during the initial days of the pandemic. And because there was this immense fear, none of the corpse burners wanted to work. So they all retreated in their homes. And unfortunately, they were pulled out by the managers. And managers are people who belong to the dome community, but there is a social hierarchy. So they are the ones who oversee everything that is happening at the cremation ground. So the managers would go door to door and pull the corpse burners out, and they would expect them to work at Manikarnika Ghat because there were corpses and corpses just coming in. There was just so much chaos. It was just a catastrophic level. And so I remember Mohan, who's a corpse burner, he was telling me that grief-stricken family members were just giving 2,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees to the corpse burners, begging them to cremate their loved ones. And under normal circumstances, a corpse burner will earn somewhere between 200 to 250 rupees for each body he cremates. But during the pandemic, he was earning fairly much more. So, and of course, the cost of everything had escalated. Cost of firewood, samagri, cost of crematory services. And so, Mohan at that point of time managed to earn slightly more than what he would normally earn. And he bought himself a fridge, he bought a cable television set, he bought jewelry for his wives, clothes for his children. But at what cost? Because he was risking his life and doing the work. And they had no gloves, they had no masks at that time. So he was really like risking everything to be working there. So,
though, I mean, I wonder whether masks and gloves would have even made
would
any
not help
difference. It would have like maybe been a hindrance for them. Anyway, so let's talk about the women that you've, the lives that you've chronicled in this book. I mean, we know that women in communities which are anyway discriminated against, so they face this double discrimination, in a sense, because even within the community they are discriminated against because of their sex. So But you've spoken extensively to these women, and like especially this person called Dolly, who's widowed, and though becoming a widow was was a misfortune which she couldn't avoid, and you talk about that whole story about her husband dying and all that. But post that, she manages to become a sort of example of resilience for the other women in the community with what she does. So talk about that and what a strong character that is. Person she is. I mean, I shouldn't like say character.
Yeah, Dolly is a phenomenal individual. She is someone who unfortunately lost her husband when she was very young. So she's a young widow and she has 5 children. And she, in order to support her children, she decided to open a small kirana store at the threshold of her one-room home. And so in this store, she sells, packets of chips, namkeens, cold drinks, but the fact that she opened a store birthed a resentment within the community because women over there, because it's a very patriarchal, very conservative community, women over there are not allowed to enjoy any kind of financial autonomy or independence. So, and I remember Dolly telling me this one incident. What happened was that when she, when she had to go to the market to procure more products for her shop, she had left her children in the care of her sister-in-law. And she went to the market, but by the time she came back, there was this very overwhelming smell of shit that was in her home. So somebody had thrown fistfuls of cow dung from her window into her home. Her home is, of course, on the ground floor. And at that time, when Dolly was telling me this incident, it's just, you could tell that, I mean, she had tears in her eyes. How can one overcome something like that? And this is the kind of backlash that she was facing from the community at different levels. But that's what the book does. Like, I follow her trajectory of how she initially, when she loses her husband, she's very naive, she's very trusting. But over a period of time, she becomes this very sharp, astute businesswoman and shows immense resilience. So Dolly is one of the women who are very inspiring individuals.
The other story within the book, which spoke to me of social change within at least the domes, maybe not our larger society, was the story of Lakshay and Komal. The intercaste relationship and how how they maintained it over so many years and eventually managed to overcome and lead respectable lives away from the basti is in itself, like, it was very cinematic. It's like a story. So do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it is. It's a love story between Komal, who is a Brahmin girl, and she lives in a Yadav colony, which is adjacent to the Dome colony. And she is in love with this Lakshay, who's from the Dome community. And Lakshay is also a very interesting individual. He's someone who is 5 feet 4 inches tall, and he's good looking, and he thinks of himself as a Bollywood hero. So he walks with a swag, and he'll run his fingers through his hair. And both of them, are in love with each other, and they keep it a secret for the longest time. But unfortunately, as all secrets go, they sometimes get revealed. And when both the communities learn about this relationship, all hell breaks loose. Now, the Yadav Basti is, they are, I think, taken aback by this relationship because they consider Komal to be one of their own, because she's been born and brought up in that basti. And her family, of course, is renting a home there. And so she's completely humiliated. She's discredited. She's called all sorts of names just because she's in love with this Dome boy. And so, yeah, the book follows their love story, and whether, because when all hell breaks loose, there comes a point where Lakshay tells her that you need to pack your bags and leave Chand Ghat. And Chand Ghat is this dome basti, which I've changed the name of to protect the identity of the people. But he tells her to leave Chand Ghat, and Komal is completely heartbroken because she doesn't know whether this is going to be the end of their relationship or whether they'll somehow manage to still survive it. So, and a lot of things happen, like Lakshay is called in by the cops and interrogated as well. Komal's father abandons the family when things are escalating over there in the neighborhood. So yeah, it's their love is exceptional. It's very moving.
Yes. Also, I found Mohan as a character very interesting, one of the corpse burners. And, especially the bit where one would assume that somebody who's a corpse burner and who burns hundreds of corpses every day, who works in that environment, would become inured to the idea of death. And what I found very revealing and very insightful is that, that conversation you have with him, when his own mother dies and he has to cremate her, he's cremating her. And at that moment, he is not just a dome who's cremating bodies. That particular body is very, very dear to him. And, so you talk about that conversation you had with him about that. And, that it really said something. And I found that one of the most moving parts of the book.
Yeah, sure. So just to introduce you to Mohan, he is a corpse burner, and the first time I met him, he had quite an intimidating presence because he's quite a reserved person. He's a man of few words. And so every time I would ask him a question, he would just answer to the point. He would never expand. So it took a while to build that relationship with Mohan where he felt comfortable enough to open his world to me. And yes, the thing is that when you're a corpse burner, you're handling your livelihood is dependent on this business of death. And so you're completely emotionally removed from the work you're doing. Just to give you an example, Lakshay, who I just spoke about, he was, I would ask him when he was growing up at Manikarnika Ghat, working over there as a shroud picker, I asked him, what is it like to see so many dead bodies? How does it impact you? And he said, subnormal tha, which is everything was normal. So the individuals in the community, they internalize death. They normalize it. But of course, when it comes to your own family member, you are going to feel grief. And this was Mohan's mother. And so when she passed away, it felt like his whole world was collapsing. And the scene that she's talking about is where he's sitting and he's watching his mother her pyre being lit, and he told me this, that here is my mother who has all her life, the bones. I see the bones of my mother that have held her upright when she would run after me playfully when I was a child. I see those same bones breaking and cracking and disintegrating to ash. I mean, so he is very emotional, and for him to express that, to be so grief-stricken and to have that anguish and pain, like it really allowed him to show a side of his, which usually, I always thought of him as someone who's very stoic, but he was able to really show us different side to me at that time.
Okay, in our conversations earlier, I've said that, when I go to Banaras, I can't even look at Manikarnika Ghat or Harishchandra Ghat. I mean, I know other people click pictures and all, but I can't even look in that direction because I find it very upsetting. But what I found about your book is very brave, is that you go in there and you're there, you're doing the research, you're standing, you've made friends with these people, you're standing there while they're burning bodies. So I want to know what you did did you have an initial reluctance? And how did you overcome that? And if you didn't have the reluctance, how come?
No, I'm human, so of course I had reluctance. Who would want to see corpses in front of you every day? But that also goes to show the kind of hard work the dome corpse burners are doing, because they are there physically watching these corpses, burning them in a very hostile environment because they're working with fire. Many times they burn their hands while stoking the pyres, and sometimes they burn their feet when they step on fresh ash from the pyres. So, yeah, I mean, the first time I went there, there are so many, it's an overwhelming presence of men at Manikarnika Ghat. For anyone who's not been there, everywhere you look, there are men who are wood sellers, there are, of course, the corpse burners, there are the boatmen, there are the tour guides, there's the samagri sellers, there are the there are shavyatris, which are these groups of men that come with the corpse to deliver the corpse to Manikarnika Ghat. And if you are a woman journalist with a notebook in one hand and a dictaphone in another, and a camera around your neck, you're bound to invite attention. And so I could sense wherever I went, there were eyes that would follow me. So I had to really overcome that and come to terms with it, because I needed to report. And I knew that this is something that was important to do. And so I did overcome it. And even the corpse burners, the first few times when I approached them, they were they weren't friendly. They were like, who is this woman? What is she doing here? Why is she asking us these questions? And understandably so, because I am first a stranger to them. And they will not open up their world to a stranger, right? Who would? If I'm meeting you today and I say, tell me about your life, you will be like, sorry, I'm not. And the other thing was that I was a woman as well. And they were not used to a woman approaching them and asking them questions. So this allowed me actually to pull back and observe them from a distance and see how they were working with each other, interacting with each other. And that really helped my ethnographic process. And then when it came to speaking to the women, it was, I would say, relatively easy. It wasn't 100% easy. It was still difficult. But I did have the opportunity of sitting with them one-to-one and having a conversation, which I think, initially there were, of course, their husbands would always be there sitting next to me while I was interviewing them. But once they understood the work I was doing and they got used to me, they sort of, they allowed me to have conversations with their wives on a one-on-one level, which I think was great. But yeah, initially the conversations were very formal. They were very to the point. But over a period of time, as I became this familiar presence, they started opening up to me. Our conversations became more organic, more free-flowing. And it was in these moments that I got insights into their personalities, just the gesture of your hand or the facial expression or the way you talk really gives you an insight into the person. So that was my process, yeah.
Okay, so you're still in touch with them, right?
Yes.
Are there any plans to like translate this? Because I feel like it should be translated, into Hindi, Malayalam, Indian languages. So are there any plans?
One Gujarati translation is in the pipeline, and hopefully there'll be other languages that will be translated into as well, the book, yeah.
Oh, that'd be great. So then I think it'll have a wider, more impact maybe, do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I feel that more people, if they get to read the book, they'll be informed about a community that otherwise many people don't even know about the existence of this community. Because even when I was working on this book, I remember people would ask me, Acha, what are you working on? And I would say, I'm working on the domes. And they didn't even know who the domes were. That there is this very specialized community of corpse burners who do this work day in and day out. And it's a highly caste-bound profession, which is inherited from the father to the son. So yes, I really hope that there are translations that come about, because people should be aware of this community. They should be aware of the lives the individuals are leading.
Okay. Okay, now we have about 14 minutes left. So should we, does anybody want to ask questions? If nobody wants to ask questions, we'll continue the conversation. But if anybody does, please do. What, everybody is so shocked by death?
It's a very morbid subject,
That's
so
true.
yes.
That is true.
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
I just bought the book. I haven't read it. I'm just asking you. So you have worked with this community, like for a long time. You have to work with this. You have to get to know them personally also to finish this book. So I'm asking you, not as a writer, but as a human. Since you worked with this kind of community, like rare or minority, how was your experience? Like, did it affect you as a human being? Like in any negative way? I'm asking you in a negative way. Like, did it took a toll on you, or some other way? Like, diving into this people's life in a more intimate way, or taking those things personally? Did it affect you in any way?
Yes, absolutely. It did affect me. There were times when, I mean, like I was telling her, I'm a human being, right? So it will affect me. The conversations I was having with them, learning about their lives, their experiences, what they go through on an everyday basis, it was affecting me. And there were times when I just wanted to leave it completely and not follow through. But I had to tell myself that I'm a journalist and I'm doing this, I'm documenting their lives because it is something important. And so that's how I carried through. And when, there's certain things that I learned as well that, of course, I was very cognizant about the fact that there is caste discrimination and caste-based violence in the country. But when I got to know them, the Dome community members, on a one-on-one basis, when I got to hear their stories, that's when I became more deeply, like I understood how deep-rooted the caste system is in everyone's psyche. So to just give you an example, I remember, during my field works, I would go from Chand Ghat to Manikarnika Ghat, and sometimes the children from the community would come with me, and they would always avoid one particular alley. And first two times, though, I didn't ask them. I didn't think about there's a reason for it. But when the third time it happened, then I asked them, okay, why are you avoiding a particular alley to go to Manikarnika Ghat, which is clearly a shorter route? And they told me that there is a temple over there in that, in that alley where the priest shoos them away. He reprimands them because he knows that they are Dome children. So he doesn't want them to be anywhere near the temple premises. Now, as children, if you're constantly belittled, if you're constantly told you're an untouchable, if you're constantly humiliated and shooed away, how does that affect you psychologically? It has a deep impact. So, and they have no ways to address or cope with this mental health concerns. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
Uh, so I've always had this, what do you say, appreciation for people who do ethnography, because I consider that as a very difficult task. And I myself do mathematics, so our ways of research is very different, right? So my question is very much related to your experience of doing ethnography. So your social location, for example, I mean, your social location or your caste location, that also should be taken into consideration. I mean, of course, people who you interview, they do take these things very seriously. From what you have described so far, that is the impression that I'm getting. So, how was your experience? Given your caste location, keeping that in your background, how was that? How did that play a role in your interactions with the communities over there?
Okay, so I'll give you an example also. First, I'll describe about what. So I'm very acutely aware of my caste privilege and my background. And when I was writing this book, I wrote it very carefully. And I worked closely with a sensitivity editor who worked on the book with me. And in the book, there are certain parts where my voice comes in. And I've inserted my voice to ask pertinent questions and also to drive the narrative forward. But I've always made sure that my own voice doesn't overshadow the voice of the domes. And having said that, I feel that, I am a journalist. That's my primary profession. And when I went to Chand Ghat, it was in the capacity of a reporter. What I felt was it's very important to document their stories and their lived experiences. And I know that no degree of reporting and research and storytelling can ever substitute these personally lived experiences. But I felt it was important still for me to write stories about Lakshay and of Bhola, what they're doing right now, because otherwise they would be unaccounted for. But at the end of the day, I also feel that if you are a journalist and you're writing from a place of empathy and you're asking informed questions and you've done your research and you're committed to the practice of research and you've spent enough time with the community, then you're doing your job as a journalist. And the second question about how their behavior was around me, just to give you an example, the first time I went to Chand Ghat, I met this elderly couple. And when they met me, they just joined their palms together and they pulled their shoulders inwards to take less space in my presence. And I was quite taken aback. They bowed in front of me. I'm old enough to be their granddaughter. So it was very strange for me. And I realized that how deeply ingrained caste is in the psyche of everyone, especially them. It continues to be ingrained in their psyche. And it becomes more relevant because just, I think last month, I read a news report where an elderly Dalit man was tortured and thrashed and assaulted by by two dominant caste men. And just because he had not folded his palms and greeted them. So this is the kind of society we are living in right now. It's a inhuman society. So I hope I've answered your question.
I think he wanted to know, if I'm not mistaken, like your status as a Brahmin and, domes being domes. What is the barrier you had to break to get stuff, to get this book, to get to be able to write this book?
To add to this question, there's a friend of mine who does ethnography as well, and she used to tell me that she's Christian, and that helps her, doing interviews because the people who interview that she interviews, they can't place her in the social hierarchy, so that helps her, conduct the interviews in a much better fashion. So my question was, how do you get around this this issue of your social location or your caste location being reflected in these conversations?
Okay. So the first few times when I met them, they were I'm very visibly from a prominent caste and class. So they were, first of all, trying to not be too close to me. They would try to, like I said, take less space around me. And there was a time where the first time a chair was called, a plastic chair was called for me. And I had to really tell them that, we are equals at the end of the day. Like, it's perfectly fine for me to sit with you and have a conversation. And I think how I was able to build a relationship of trust where they felt comfortable and secure to talk to me about their lives was because I kept going there, kept going back. I wasn't someone who just spoke to them one day and then wrote an article and forgot about them. I was very committed. I was very serious, and they could see that. And then when they started opening up to me over this course of 8 years, it took me 8 years to write this book. When they started opening up to me, that's when they voluntarily started telling me information. They themselves would say, come, let's have tea, let's talk, let's chat. Let me tell you what happened to me today. So I think I hope I've answered your question. Okay.
Anyone else?
Sometime in the late, I think, 70s and early 80s, there was a movie made in Bangla, which was about the Dome community. I forget the name of the movie, all right? And what happens is, it's in a very isolated village where they don't have any sons. So finally, the last two in the family are the father and the daughter. The father passes on, and the daughter has to light the pyre. So it was a satire, of course. But what would your take on something like this be, as a journalist, as a writer? I know in Chandpal Ghat and all those areas, there's a density. So it's
Sorry,
not
ma'am, can you just hold the mic closer? I can't hear you very clearly.
Okay. You got my question?
No. Can you just repeat that? Thank you.
So sometime in the late 80s, or maybe I think early 80s, there was a movie made in Bangla, which was about the Dome community, where finally in the community it's just the father and the daughter. And we know that as far as the Hindu community is concerned and Dome community concerned, the woman is not allowed to light the pyre at that time, all right? So naturally, the profession passes on from father to son and so on. And the last one now in this scenario was the father who passes on, and the daughter has to light the pyre. Do you see that piece of fiction ever happening as a reality? What would your take be on something like this?
In terms of whether a Dome woman will be working at the cremation ground?
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, even if it's a piece of fiction, I think it's great if the women are encouraged to step at the cremation ground and work and earn. Because right now, they don't have any kind of financial independence at all. So they are very dependent on their husbands. Their identity, their finances, everything is attached to this male person, their husband. So yes, I would, if the women get a chance, that would be great. But I would feel that now, in the 21st century, the Dome women should be encouraged to study and have other professional alternatives to choose from, rather than working at a cremation ground. And interestingly, Bhola, who's one of the individuals who I spoke about, he has managed to take 3 of his nieces to Chennai and has enrolled them in a school. And I think that's a big step for the community, because usually what happens is that the girls are pulled out of the schools and they get married at a very young age. And here he's managed to convince his siblings that let's give your daughters a chance to study. And it's going to make a world of a difference, because otherwise the women in the Dome community, in that basti, their lives are only centered on their families, taking care of the families, taking care of the children, cleaning, washing the utensils, washing the clothes. Here, when I was speaking to the nieces, Bhola's nieces, who managed to go to school in Chennai, they said for the first time, we are getting to think about ourselves. We are being given this opportunity to take reins over our life. We are not thinking about our, helping our mothers in the kitchen or, taking care of our younger siblings. We are thinking about ourselves and what we want in the future. So I think that's a big change that has come about.
I think with that, we'll wrap up. I think time's up. Thank you so much
Thank you,
for talking.
Manjula. Thank you so much.